Philadelphia is steep in broadcast history. From the early pioneering days of broadcasting in the 1920s to today, Philadelphia has always been at the forefront. The Delaware Valley has been home to some of the best local programming in the country, starting with the early soap operas and children's shows to pioneering the best news formats in the country. Much of it all began right here. From radio announcers to television personalities, cameramen to directors, these were the broadcasters that burned out the airwaves. These were the pioneers of Philadelphia broadcasting.
Welcome to another edition of Pioneers of Philadelphia Broadcasting. I'm Mike Strug, and today with me, in the interest of full disclosure, is somebody I knew before we were broadcast pioneers. I'm talking about a fellow by the name of Bobby Kravitz, and Bobby and I both grew up in Logan, the Logan section of Philadelphia. And I guess we knew each other in Logan, and then the next time we saw each other was at Channel 6?
Channel 6.
Tell that story.
All right, let me preface this.
Maybe I ought to back up for 1 second. Bobby is a photographer, has been a photojournalist from childhood. Now we'll skip ahead to 1968.
1968. I was at Temple University. I was sitting in the bathroom. Not sitting, I'm sorry. I was standing in the bathroom. And Frank Goldstein, another photographer from Channel 10, walked up to me and while we were doing our thing together and said, "Whoa, how would you like to work for Channel 6? Because I have to replace myself when I become a cameraman." That's how they did it then.
Yeah.
So I said, "Yeah, sure." He says, "Okay, go see Harold Hodgman tomorrow." And Harold Hodgman was a senior photographer. So go see Harold Hodgman tomorrow and talk to him. So I walked
But you had not been a photographer before this. You hadn't.
Not this. No. I wanted to be a broadcaster. That's why I was going to communications course in Temple. So I walked into the newsroom, and it was empty. Harold was there though. Just we made an appointment, and he looked at me, said, "You want to you want to work here?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Okay, you can work here." Now I went through a whole week of those tests that they used to give us, the psychology tests and the writing tests, whatever it was. And a week later, I walked into the newsroom, my first day on the job, and again, it was early morning. There was a assignment editor by the name of Charlie on the desk, and you were sitting there, you looked up and said, "What the hell are you doing here?" And I told you I worked here, and bang, from 1968 until 2000, I was a photojournalist or cameraman, as ever you want to call me, for Channel 6.
We used to call you shooters.
Yeah, shooters, right.
You know?
Absolutely.
And that was not in any way derogatory. We were reporters and shooters and soundmen,
Right.
and that was the term.
Right. And I started as a soundman, and I worked my way up from soundman. They taught me how to edit. I had to go down to the film lab with Mr. Bala for about 4 weeks to learn how the film is developed. And then they put me on camera a little bit. And my first cameraman was a cameraman by the name of Sergio Varsana.
From Argentina.
From Argentina. My first direct contact of how he really was we were called out on a suicide. We used to cover suicides from the Ben Franklin Bridge. So we get there. I think we're the only camera people there because other stations really didn't carry it. And we were sort of like number 4 behind Superman cartoons on UHF.
You're not exaggerating. In 1968, I was working at Channel 6. We were number 4 behind Wee Willie Weber and his cartoons on the early news. But go ahead, pick it up from there.
So we're on the platform with the police, and they were pretty good with the press at the time. And it's now about 3.5 hours into this. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. Sergio's starting to complain. Then it's 6 o'clock in the morning, and Sergio finally says to the guy, Yo, I'm sick and tired of this. Either jump or get the hell off the bridge because I want to eat." And the guy took his shirt off and jumped. And I was like, holy cow. And that was my first big news story in the process. No one questioned anybody. Apparently the guy was going to jump anyway, so he packed up.
Sad story.
I packed up with a gut feeling and went into the car with him, and we drove off.
And that was the beginning of a career that then stretched until yesterday and tomorrow when you'll be working again.
Yeah.
You have been there for a long, long time at Channel 6, now at Channel 10 occasionally.
Yeah, all told, I'm 47 years up to this present time. Channel 10, after my operations and everything, asked me if I'd like to come in and be a backup for Chopper 10.
We'll talk about the operations later.
Okay.
Let's go back to the beginning. So it's 1968. 1968, we're working. Are we in color at that point?
No.
Or are we still black and white?
Black and white.
We're shooting black and white film. Describe the camera and the need for a sound man. There are no sound men anymore. There are no cameras anymore.
Right.
But go ahead.
Well, I started with a Pro 600. It was a square box with a long viewfinder, and inside the camera itself was a heater to make sure film, and that's what we had, film, 16 millimeter film, was warmed up in the wintertime. And the camera weighed about 25 pounds. But, you know, you had what they call a brace to put on your shoulder, but most cameramen did not want to use it. And once I became a camera person, I started using this brace all the time, and I would brace myself up like this and lean on stuff. There's a picture of me leaning on my tripod with the brace and the camera. And it was a very heavy camera, and everyone got angry because I stayed on shoulder. I would come into press conferences, shoot with the microphone up there, and then when I thought I got the best, because I didn't have a reporter with me yet, when I thought I had the best sound bite, which I usually did, I picked up the mic, took myself and the camera out where everybody had to break down off of a tripod with a sound man.
Yeah, I don't know if laymen understand that, but initially, almost all of the shooting that was done on tripods.
Right.
So you'd come into a news conference, for example, or you covered a fire, and you would set up on the corner with a tripod and shoot the fire. Then you'd move the tripod, and people were reluctant to use shoulder braces. Now it's commonplace. It's not even.
Well, now it's common, but most people now, if you look, still put on tripod. It was tripods, shoulder brace, tripods.
Now you also had a sound man.
Yes.
You had a sound man because there was a big device that he was carrying.
It was a box. It was a box this big, this deep. It had a sound amplifier in it. It had all these cables, and they had the big gray umbilical cord that came from your camera to the sound amplifier. And this is how we did it. Or if you were using a silent camera, which was a wind-up,
Bell and Howell?
Bell and Howell wind-up, you used what we called the Your tape deck, which was at the time a reel-to-reel, hung on your shoulder, and afterwards you would edit that film to sync up with the sound that was on the tape. And then sometimes it would be a 3-track or a 3-chain, as they called it, and you would put B-roll behind everything.
I don't think this matters to you folks out there who are unfamiliar with how we go about shooting and how things have changed over the years. But at the same time, you're mentioning that your reel-to-reel tape recorder. As a reporter, I carried one of those with a big microphone. Today, you carry the equivalent of your smartphone, and you can record on that. Back then, the equipment was equipment, not something you could slide into your pocket. The other story I tell is that when we were shooting film, when we got back to the station, it would take 45 minutes to process the film. You mentioned Mr. Bala. There was a processor in the building at Channel 6 run by Mr. Bala, and that's the way we all referred to him. He was Indian descent, and so we didn't know how to pronounce his full name. And he called himself Mr. Bala. And for 45 minutes, he'd be processing. So as a reporter, you could write then and figure out what you were going to say. By the time I retired back in 2009, if we went to a story for the 11 o'clock news, we might get there at 10 of 11, and we were expected to be live at 11 o'clock. So there was not that time to think about what you were going to say and write and that sort of thing. The transition for photographers was just as drastic, as different. So now we're starting with this
Minicam.
The big camera.
Big camera weighed 40 pounds. The backpack weighed about 35 to 40 pounds, or maybe even more than the camera. And we had a news director at the time who used to say to us, "I don't want you to put the backpack, the battery-powered backpack, on a dolly. You have to carry it on your shoulder." So it was like wearing a backpack that was all metal and 50 or 45 pounds, and plus a camera that was 35 to 45 pounds on your shoulder, and it was videotape, our first time with videotape. So, you know, that was a transition where a lot of the cameramen that were the older cameramen really were hesitant to do. But I sort of fell into it right away, and because I did, they sent me to a school called Philadelphia Wireless. I don't even know if you know this. No. They sent me to the Philadelphia Wireless. It was on around 12th and Walnut. And my father was there as a teacher for oil burners and new gas heaters that were coming in at the time. So I went into the school. I learned everything there was about tubes and these new boards that were coming in. And within about 2 years, all that schooling went down the drains because what we call chips, which you all have now in your iPhones, little chips. All you have to do is replace them, and that was it. But I knew everything there was about tubes and wiring. So,
well, I think it was kind of interesting. As a reporter, I'm watching what you're doing.
Right.
And so you mentioned Harold Hodgman. Harold Hodgman was, I guess, the dean of photographers for the whole city. He was quite a guy who, we used to say, he could edit in the camera. By the time you got back to the editing booth, he had shot it in such a way you hardly had to change anything. But he was a guy who was truly special in his ability. So he was the first. We're working with film, and if something went wrong with the film camera, he'd open it up, make an adjustment, boom. By the time we go to electronic news gathering, ENG, with videotape, if you opened one of those cameras up, you were looking at the inside of a pinball machine. You had, you had no idea what to do. You couldn't do anything.
No, you had to wait, and eventually the TV stations realized to have what they call the boards, extra board parts, in case one board failed.
And so you'd go to maintenance.
Right, you go back to our engineering, Frank Mack, and his engineers, and they would just pull out the board and place another one in, and you were on your way. That took about 5 minutes.
Okay, and what are you shooting with now?
All right, now we come down to, I guess they were back to a cam with beta cam. Now what I'm shooting with?
Yes.
I'm shooting with my phone. Right, and I'm inside Chopper 10, if that's what you're referring to.
Yeah.
I'm inside Chopper 10 with the gyro cam, which, by the way, we had the first one at Channel 6, if you remember.
Okay, but again, and if we're talking about the size of the cameras, it's now, I don't know.
Well, some of them are but they're still about heavy as they were before with the beta tapes, and that would be for everybody else VHS tapes.
Right.
And now it's a camera about this big, or they're using still cameras that go into video. And I've seen a friend of mine, Tommy McDonald, who was a reporter for a radio station, WHYY now, and learned how to shoot through a couple of us who taught him. And he picked up his first a DSL. Is that what a DSL camera that does video?
Yeah, I'm afraid as we talk about this is of interest to us. It may not be interesting
might not be for them.
to those who are watching the program. You started at Channel 6 and had no idea that your career would take off as it did.
No.
Talk about some of the highlights, some of the things you've covered. You've probably been all over the world.
I've been all over the world. I went to the Gulf War, which was exciting enough. But the most fascinating thing for me there at the Gulf War was what ABC did. We were the only camera people there, local, and by that night, they had our video along with their video. But they had this box with a satellite phone in it, where they could actually plug in to this box and pull up a kind of a satellite dish and beam to a satellite in the sky everything for the same day. We used to have to take our film, go to an airport, or take our videotapes, go to an airport, put it on a plane, wait for that plane, and the next day it would be shown on the air. But we were shown on the air sometimes live. We were shown our video was shown the same day. That fascinated me. That really fascinated me.
We'll get back to that in a second, but that just reminded me of an interesting...
There you go. That's what happens.
Yeah. So we were covering the 1976 Democratic Convention up in New York, and it was Madison Square Garden. To get the film in 1976 back to the station, we would shoot our story, and we would go to Grand Central Station, Pennsylvania Station, and go to a train that was heading to Philadelphia. We'd find a conductor, hand him the film and a $5 bill, and say, somebody will meet you at 30th Street Station. And that's the way we got the film from New York down to Philadelphia.
Or anywhere else, really.
Anywhere
we used to
else.
put them in taxi cabs,
Yeah,
remember?
Yeah, exactly. So we would use whatever method we needed in order to get that film back to Philadelphia.
Jim Gardner and I, well, let me preface this. Yeah. For a whole week, I stood out in front of Powelton Village, waiting for the first move, 1978. And finally it happened where Commissioner Rizzo at the time got everybody together and moved into the Powelton Village house. Well, here we are, all this shooting, policeman ramp goes down, shooting this whole thing and ramp being shot, and after the whole move situation, the next day I was in Rome with Cardinal Kroll and Jim Gardner covering the Pope, John Paul, who died. And spent 2 weeks there because they didn't pick a pope for about 2 weeks. We had a whole 2 weeks in Rome and didn't sleep because what happened was we ended up going there, shooting on the plane, getting off. Now I'm working about 24 hours, literally. And I finally put my head down on the pillow and I get a knock on the door from Jim Gardner. Oh, ABC just called. They're at Rise Studio. We can edit our film, process our film, edit it, and send it out. And I just yelled to him, I just laid down. He said, get your ass up, let's go. 18-hour days with maybe about 3 hours sleeps in Rome through all that because we could, again, not via satellite, but send it through cable line across the ocean back to ABC.
Yeah, I think the transition, and it's hard to not talk about this, the transition in the technology has just been so totally overwhelming. Even live reports in Philadelphia, you had a satellite, a truck that fed a microwave signal to various receivers here in the Philadelphia area and out in the suburbs and down in Delaware and over in New Jersey. We had receive points. Now you can use the internet. Tell us what that's like.
I talked to the cameramen out on the street, and they have transmitters that will go to their truck, which will enter into as the layman, into your computer. They can edit that way and then send it back via the internet. And that's what's happening. I see now people in stadiums. They have this antenna on the back of a camera, and they don't need the cables that we have to drag with us all the time, or a person behind you. This sends it back to a booth in the stadium, and again, onto the internet and back to the studio around the world. It's an amazing situation. I always used to say, when the hell are we getting rid of these cables? Well, they got rid of the cables, and they got rid of the videotape, and they use what everybody knows now is a memory stick.
Yeah.
And they just stick it into the camera, which our cameraman over here, Brad Seekoff, has in his camera, and it's a memory stick. Yeah. And it's an amazing situation, and I love it. I'm past that now. We use it in the chopper. In the chopper, there's a memory stick in our video recorder.
Right.
So I know how it goes now, but it's just fascinating to see all the directions it's going to take. And I can't wait for holograms where you can interview me in 3D via a hologram and don't have to leave your studio.
I don't want to see you in 3D.
Nobody, even Susan, my wife, doesn't want to see me in 3D.
But let's talk about some of the other things that you've done over the years, other experiences that where you've, here in Philadelphia, where you've covered. You mentioned Move. That was a major event. Can you think of some others that you've covered that just come to mind as, I remember being there because?
The biggest one was 3 Mile Island.
Oh.
I don't know if it's not Philadelphia, but it's at the outside. It's our coverage area. It's 3 Mile Island. I get called to go to 3 Mile Island. But
let me interrupt for those of you who may be watching this not in Philadelphia. 3 Mile Island was a nuclear power plant right outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, 1978, 79, 80. It's right in there.
Around there.
I know that because I was not on the street at the time. I was working on the assignment desk at Channel 3. And they had what appeared to be a meltdown, was going to be a meltdown. And now we start sending people out to Harrisburg, and we don't know, in fact, if there's going to be some sort of nuclear explosion or what would happen. You're out there. Go ahead.
Well, first, before I got out there, when Susan found out I was going, I'm packing. She says, where are you going? I said, 3 Mile Island. My wife stood against our door, you're not going. You're not going. I mean, literally, I had to pick her up and take her. So this is one of the things. That was the big event that I'm out there, and I was with Vern Odom, and we had this white stuff coming down overnight. We had no idea what it was. No one ever explained what it was. It looked like ash. But Vern and I just figured, well, in 10, 15 years, no kids. So, but that was one of them. Here in Philadelphia, I think we've covered everything in Philadelphia. The moving of the Liberty Bell, that was a big thing. That was 1976. It was our bicentennial. And Commissioner Rizzo vowed he'd bring the National Guard into Philadelphia because there were demonstrations as usual. Well, it was a very low-key situation, except that night moving of the Liberty Bell. It was freezing rain. We were all inside the old encasement where of the Independence Place, where Liberty Bell used to be.
That is in the main
building.
Main building of Independence Hall.
And you had press people, network people. It was the most chilling, even with the freezing cold and freezing rain out there thing that I had. I had goosebumps on the back of my neck. Here they are moving the most historic bell in the world.
New Year's Eve.
It was New Year's Eve. Absolutely. New Year's Eve. They're moving it out. And I'm getting chills. And here's the funny part of this whole story. I wrapped my camera in trash bags, along with a very thin vinyl raincoat that they gave us with the mini cams.
Right.
I wrapped it. And
because if they got wet, they would stop working.
They would stop working.
Good.
So what happened was all the networks were hysterical on me. You know, they thought, a little local yokel, blah, blah, blah. We're moving it out, and I'm getting every shot and the whole thing. And what happens is that the next day, Mel Campman calls me into his office and says, ABC wants to use your film because their cameras froze. And I started to laugh, and I told Mel what happened. And Mel said to me, it's up to you.
Oh.
And
Mel was the news director.
Mel was the news director. We had a news director by the name of Mel Campman.
Yeah.
Other things that happened, some were Joe Frazier. Before his fight, I'm in the ring at the Frazier Gym here in Philadelphia. That's another big historic thing. That was exciting because it was before that big fight.
Well, let me ask you something else. We've mentioned that you regularly fly in the helicopter.
Right.
Both for Channel 6 years ago and more recently for Channel 10. Many people would think of helicopters being a little dangerous. You don't know, how do they fly? They're not like airplanes. You've actually experienced when they've had some problems.
Yeah.
Describe that. Bobby was on a Channel 6 helicopter when it crashed.
It's funny because everybody says, don't you think about it? Never thought about it. Never. You don't think about it. You get in your seat, you fly. Well, one morning we're taking off. We go about a story high, and bells and whistles start going, and something happened. And that means something's going on, figuring we could land, but not really. It started shaking, and as we came down, we hit the dolly we took off from. It tipped over, and literally, as it was coming down, it felt like a long, long time. It was only probably about 10 seconds. I wasn't high, thank God, or I wouldn't be here. Yeah. But 10 seconds, and I did see my life in front of me. I mean, you just think of everything, in an amazing situation.
Yeah, that was down on the Delaware River where there's a heliport.
Yeah, on Sterling Helicopter. And, you know, I guess I don't know still to this day what really happened, but we survived. Later on,
how did you get out of the helicopter? It
pilot,
tumbled over, right?
My pilot, Paul, cut because my seatbelt was stuck, was locked, wouldn't open. So he cut me out of there, and they lifted me out. I hurt my neck and my back, but within a year later, things started happening in my body, like real small cracks started opening up bad that nobody saw because MRIs weren't around at the time. And I ended up, you know, getting about 4 operations because of it.
And you got back in a helicopter. That's the part that most people would say, I had enough of that. No, you know.
I did that. I said to Carla, I don't think I want to go back. And then the more I thought about it, I said I wanted to go back. And the only one that really was upset about it was Susan, my wife. But she realizes flying and taking pictures, it's something that you can't understand. It's a great thrill. I guess it's being dangerous again. I don't know.
Yeah, and you still enjoy it.
I love it. It's not enjoy it. I love it. I mean, I love being in that helicopter, and even though it's part-time. Yesterday I was up and we filmed some little news clip, and I loved it. I loved it.
Yeah. Do you think the technology is changing, all technology?
Yes.
So we've seen where we've gone from these big black and white film cameras to now literally being able to use a camera while yours is bigger. People are sending video into television stations that they're shooting on their phones. Mm-hmm. And the quality is pretty darn good. Mm-hmm. Better than the stuff we were shooting when you first started.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Will the technology change for helicopters as well as we now begin to use drones? Do you see them as your competition?
I see that coming. I see that coming. Whereas drones now, once the FAA gives all this other new rulings that they're trying to put in, a definite push, I see the stations, unless you're going a far distance, to start using drones. They'll start training their cameramen or the reporters, who this morning on one of the stations here in Philadelphia says, oh yes, I even use my phone to help film some stuff out on the street with my cameraman.
Yeah, in that sense, it's a different world. Right. We saw our jobs as separate. I was a reporter, you were a photographer, he was a sound man, mm-hmm. and we each had our own responsibilities. And now it's kind of come together into one person can do it all.
Yeah, one person, and even now, the drone and the person back at the station could do it. And that's what's coming. Mm-hmm. It's like the drones they use for military. We're here in the United States, but they can send a drone over in Syria and do whatever they have to do. And that's what's happening. You and I together had a funny story with Roy Rogers. You want to tell it?
Oh, no, you go ahead and tell it. It is a story I tell repeatedly.
Yeah, Mike and I were sent to cover Roy Rogers' restaurant opening on City Line Avenue. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't far from the station. So we're on City Line, and I'm 5'5". Now they tell me I'm 5'4". Okay, but I'm 5'5" at the time, and I have a camera on my shoulder, and Roy Rogers is up on a platform.
Out in back of the Roy Rogers restaurant, they had created a little platform right. so Roy could talk to the crowd. A lot of people, Roy Rogers, a lot of people were there to see
right.
him. And Bobby and I are right in front.
Right, and the more excited people were not the kids. It was we as adults. It was us. We were really excited, but here I am, and I'm shooting upwards towards Roy Rogers. And Roy Rogers says,
he says, I remember this quote. He goes, "Whoa, partner, nobody looks good if you shoot him up the nose."
And I couldn't laugh. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't laugh, you know. And I'm sitting there with my camera. Mike is laughing because it was funny. Now something reminds me of shooting up. I'm on a live shot, one of our very first live shot at the ballpark. Dickie Knowles is the pitcher, and he's having a rough time. Tollefson is the sports guy.
Don Tollefson.
Don Tollefson. So here we are standing on the field, and it's 1980. You have Dickie Knowles, you have Pete Rose, you have Tug McGraw, you have them all, the 1980, and we're doing a live shot. And we're talking to Dick Knowles, and Don Tollefson from the station is talking to Dick Knowles on a live shot, not knowing what was going to happen. So here I am again on shoulder because we had to break down real fast.
Okay. So Don is back at the station.
Right.
There's an earpiece for Knowles that he can hear what Don is saying.
Right.
And pick it up.
So Knowles was having a tough time. It was really rough for him. So Don says, well, what do you do when you have a rough time like that? Is it tight? What do you do to have a tight situation? And no lie, Dickie Knowles, because they keep this thing, Dickie Knowles reaches behind his back pocket, pulls out a bottle of Vaseline, and says, when I get in tight situations, Don, I use this Vaseline. They told me back at the station, the news director went nuts. Don couldn't stop laughing while the rest of the report. That's the kind of things that happen to us, spontaneous situations out on the field. I got to tell you, I'm one of the few cameramen did not carry a still camera with me. I think you know this. Mm. I never asked anyone that I had presidents, Gardner, Kane, I went to 2 presidents. I didn't ask for pictures with them. I never did because I thought it was, and I really did. I thought it was unprofessional. I never took a drink, not even a thing with, except one day at the zoo, but not.
Which is another story.
Which is another story. But that was when we were young. But after that, never did a drink again while I had a camera. But I just, even the big events, I shoot them, I do it that day, and they leave my mind. And that's why I've been lately, because someone's talking about writing an anecdote book of everybody's funny stories, nice stories that happened out on the field. I have a computer worth of stories that I've sent to Mike that we're going to try and get something together to do that. But it is the most amazing thing that when people ask me, what's, like you did, I don't remember unless someone says something, a word or a sentence, and it pops back into my...
You know, one of the things I guess we should talk about, we mentioned that at some point, Channel 6, WFIL at that point, before WPVI, was number 4 in the market in terms of news. We were behind Willie Weber and his cartoons, as I said. And then Action News happened. Yeah. And it changed not only our lives, but the lives of Philadelphians. Right. Action News is the definitive news, at least based on ratings, for all of Philadelphia. Bobby, you were there, I was there. Tell us the way you saw it.
It was 1970, and all of a sudden our news director comes up to us and tells us, we're going to do a whole new theme thing. We've had a console, and it's called Action News. The whole newsroom went, Action News? What are you, crazy? And that name came from Larry Pollock passing a sign on the street or in the air and saying, you know, Action Plumbing or something like that. And he thought of Action News. Well, as we started doing this, when we used to go to press conferences, they didn't wait for us. It was WFIL, number 4, number 5 in the ratings. They never wait. I mean, I would be there, and by the time we were sent or got there, we were late, or even they started early. They never waited for us. Now here you have this Action News. The people of Philadelphia started watching us. Suddenly, they knew our reporters. They knew Mike. They knew Larry Kane. They knew Joe Pellegrino, and they knew all of these situations. They knew everybody. So what happened was, one day when I got to a press conference, and I was about 10 minutes late, because we're always sent late. You're never there on time. I walk in, and they're all clapping. And I said, what are you clapping about? He says, we're waiting for you. What do you mean you're waiting for you? Listen, you're number 1. And they told me this directly. What happened was we became from number 4 or 5 in 6 months. We ended up being number 1. And how that really happened is when Action News first started, I think, Mike, you'll remember, maybe there were 19 people in the whole newsroom when we first started this thing. And our assignment editor was Tommy Dolan.
Tom Dolan.
Okay, Tom Dolan. And he would get us all together in the morning there was no night shift yet. So it was just all day shift. Get us in and sit down and say, do you have any ideas? And no lie, we would read the papers, but we didn't need it because all of a sudden we had a police beat, we had a political beat, City Hall. We had a lot of beats, and people were getting contacts, and people were calling us. And Inquirer the next morning would follow our lead from the 11 o'clock show. That's what was neat.
I think what made Action News, and I don't know that we've talked about this, was that we picked up the pacing.
Right.
Before this, if you did a story, every story was worth a minute, 2 minutes, whatever it was. Now suddenly we were covering things in 15 seconds. Right. We called them pacers or tickies. Right.
Tickies.
Tickies was the word that we used.
And a reporter story was a minute 20 or 40 only. Period.
Exactly. You had, as a reporter, you had to run no more than a minute 30.
Right.
It picked up the pacing. Before that, there were no limits. Whatever you thought it took to tell your story, if it was 3 minutes, it was 3 minutes. But by picking up that pacing and including a number of what we call voiceovers, VOs, which
Reporters
are
does
just
over film, right.
Voiceover film, which would be just a story of a new traffic pattern. Here, look at this. Or somebody had won an award and we'd had 15 seconds, not a full package of a minute and a half on somebody winning the award. So the pacing had its effect, apparently, so that it attracted viewers.
If at that point, they started sending cameramen to news conferences without a reporter, whereas we would shoot at least 2 minutes worth of film and would take it back, and the writer would write the story about the news conferences, and we would take B-roll of whatever the news conference was about. B-roll is film that showed, if I was having a news conference on my lamp, which I'm looking at now, they'd write the story about the lamp, and I'd go out and shoot that particular lamp they're talking about, and you would see the pictures on the air.
I don't know if you remember, Eric Goldenberg was hired as a photographer with a Bell and Howell.
Right.
And he was the suburban photographer.
Right.
His job every day was to go out into the suburbs and find 3 stories out in the suburbs. And it could be a backyard festival. It didn't have to be anything big. But in order to say we were in Montgomery County, we were in Chester County, and his responsibility every day was to come back with 3 tickies of these little suburban stories. And the theory was, if you went to a backyard festival and there were 20 people there, and you told them this is going to be on Channel 6 at 6 o'clock, those 20 people would watch, and they would call all their relatives to tell all the relatives that they should watch.
Right.
And in fact, that's how they build audience.
And that's how Action News started. I mean, we started on a matchstick, which stayed lit up to today. They're still #1 in the broadcast field as local news. And that's been 47 years, or probably about 45 years.
A long time.
Yeah, yeah.
You are such an admirable person in your ability to confront difficulties in your life.
Yeah.
And I am leading to the cancer.
Yeah.
And Bobby has suffered with bladder cancer.
Bladder cancer.
And I don't know, pick it up from there.
pick
But
it up.
he's still working. That's
Yeah.
all I can say. He's still a happy soul.
Yeah.
And
Well, I'm a very positive person.
Exactly.
And I was out at Chopper 10 one day, and blood started coming out of my urine, and I was getting sick. So I went to the hospital and found out I had bladder cancer. They tried all sorts of chemo, didn't work. They took my bladder out, and And I'm saying this with all respect to, I wear a bag, and I'm looking at the camera directly. I mean, it's a bag. It's a urine bag for the rest of my life that's attached to my body. I go around with that, and it's a normal life. I don't think about it, and I just do what I have to do because I love life, and I love my wife, and in that order, and I love working. I love being a cameraman. The other thing that happened to me was I don't even know if you know this, I had a mitral valve replaced with a mechanical valve. So now I have to take Coumadin, and which is a blood thinner. So for the rest of my life, I've got these things. And then now I found out I have gout. So now I have 2 conflicting diets with pills. But you know what? I'm talking to you, and I'm enjoying it, and I'm loving it. And I'm a very ego person that says, you know, just stay your route and enjoy your life. There's too much happening out there that, you know, that's bugging people that is very light.
That Bobby, is the lesson that you have for all of us. It's about living life as best you can and overcoming whatever adversities you find. You are admirable, Bobby.
Well,
it's good to know you. I'm proud to know you. And thank you very much for joining us again for this edition of Pioneers of Philadelphia Broadcasting. We'll see you again next time.